Final four of the URC as Leinster have to go to Loftus Versfeld to run with the Bulls, and Munster welcome the Glasgow Warriors to Thomond Park. We have an Ireland squad on the horizon next week as well, so there's plenty to discuss on this week's edition of The Left Wing. I'm Rúaidhrí O'Connor, standing in for Will Slattery, who's still recovering after his wedding last Friday, and I'm delighted to be joined by Luke Fitzgerald on the line and Cian Tracey in studio. Luke, unfortunately, is hors de combat after... Did you break your ankle on the dance floor at Will's wedding, Luke, or what happened?
Sadly, no. It was another ex-colleague, Dave Moore. Played for Leinster, Harlequins and Connacht. I don't know if you remember him. Nice scrum half. We were at school together, so I was a groomsman. But no, sadly, I made it. I actually made it through the wedding, but sadly, I was actually playing against another old colleague, Owen O'Malley. The day I was leaving, I broke my ankle playing paddle against him in Portugal. Yeah, so dangerous sport, that paddle.
You're never not out of the medical room, Luke.
I know, yeah. Sadly, I don't have any resources now and 2 children to try and look after, so I don't know. It's been an absolute mess.
I'd say you're popular at home. Cian, did you get through the weekend okay? You were at a stag, I think, so God, we could have been serious injury room.
Well, I'm not in a cast. I'm not in painkillers. All my limbs are functioning. But yeah, no, all good. Was in beautiful West Cork, so lovely part of the world, especially when the sun is shining. So yeah, it was very good. Well,
I was working, so I saw both games, but I'm not the pundit today. I'm hoping you guys watched the rugby as well. We got 2 URC quarterfinals involving the Irish teams. They both, obviously Ulster lost out, so the Leinster and Munster progressed to this weekend. All 4 home teams, Cian, in the URC quarterfinals won. None of the games really were classics. Like the Bulls Benetton was a decent game. The two ones involving the Irish teams weren't brilliant. Does the URC have 8 quality teams for a quarter-final stage, do you think?
Yeah, I would have my doubts. Look, I think the URC has been brilliant since the South African teams have come in, so it's definitely, I think, important to stress that it's not about bashing the competition, but it is still pretty new. I think we have to remember that. So I don't think there's any problems with maybe suggesting maybe little finesses to the format, because I think, yeah, and obviously I was watching from afar, and I watched both the Irish games live, and I watched them back properly, I suppose you could say, yesterday. And my sense, having watched them live and then watching them back, it didn't really change, that I felt like they were both pretty much damn squibs, I have to say. Now, there was obviously certain reasons for that. Ulster's injury list, which obviously we can get into. Like the Ospreys were gamey, but I just don't think they were ever going to beat Munster. I thought the attendances at both games were disappointing as well. Again, I understand it that supporters don't have bottomless pits, and it's, again, we're very lucky to be, paid to go to the games and all that. But I just thought, like, watching Leinster and Ulster on the TV, and you see the backdrop to pretty much an empty Aviva Stadium, and you think only the lower tier was open. Now, you can obviously tell us more about what the atmosphere was like, but from watching on TV, I thought it looked really poor. It reminded me of the COVID games, which obviously no one wants to ever go back to. So I was a little disappointed in terms of how it looked visually, and obviously, I'm normally at the game, so I don't get that sense and watching it on TV. So I didn't think the games themselves matched up to, I thought it was all just a bit low. So you're really hoping that it might pick up this weekend, because I have no doubt that the 4 teams we have left are 4 excellent teams, and they should be 2 good games, and whoever's in the final should be a good game. But I'm not sure the quarterfinals really work, if I'm being honest. Yeah,
like the atmosphere was decent at both games, and the people who went to the Aviva were made some noise, and the Ulster fans really got behind their team, and it wasn't a bad contest. They were both decent events, but I am conscious of the fact that the season tickets don't cover the games, so that's a big factor for fans, especially the Leinster fans who've been spending a fortune in recent weeks. Luke, in France they do the top 6, and then the teams ranked 3 to 6 play off for a spot in the semi-final, and the teams who've finished 1 and 2 earn a kind of weekend off. Is that something they should look at? Is it even just give all the teams a weekend off, and if someone has to go to South Africa, or a South African team has to travel to Europe, it gives them a bit more of a chance to book their travel, as Leinster were scrambling to get out of Dodge on Saturday night, and we'll have a bit of a panic trying to get back. Both teams, whoever gets to the final, has a bit of a tight turnaround coming back. Do you think it needs to be looked at, or do you like the format? Because I think it does have a good impact on the regular season run-in, that there's so many teams have something to play for. It just doesn't necessarily deliver great contests at the end of it.
I think the first point that Cian made about, it's still kind of, the competition is still in its infancy, you know. So I think we're still like, you know, things are moving around a little bit. I think that's probably an important point to make, you know, and it's probably difficult then to make, you know, just to, you wouldn't want to condemn the format. I mean, it's always nice for more teams to have something to play for at the end. I think it's great for the supporters, and you just would have loved to have seen one upset. Now, look, I think the Benetton one, interesting enough, was close enough. I thought there was periods where I thought the Stormers gave Glasgow a good run too. You know, they never looked like really winning the games, but at the same time, you know, there was a few moments whereby you said, well, if they got that one there, you know, this could be a bit sweatier. You know, and Goosen had to get that kick, you know, to kind of seal it off against Benetton as well. So I'll be cautious enough about writing it off. I think, look, this weekend, when we look at the results, we're obviously going to say, well, wouldn't it have been better to have 3 to 6 playing, because those teams obviously would have been a little bit closer, and there could have been a scalp taken there somewhere. So yeah, I'm holding judgment for the moment, Ruds, but definitely feels like maybe there is still a bit of a difference between, say, the bottom half of the league and the top half of the league, and some of those teams creeping at the end. Like, you just knew the Ospreys were never going to have enough in the tank against Munster at home. But yeah, you know, the only interesting thing about that is that you know, when I look at it, I probably only think that the top 3 teams would have a chance of beating Munster at home the way they're going at the moment, even though they look a little tired. But we will come to that. So yeah, look, I think we probably get to the business end now. These are all very exciting matches. I know there's some tight turnarounds and things like that, but you know, Munster were able to go ahead and do that last year and put together a serious run. So there's no reason that anyone should be complaining. It's definitely doable. Just definitely the harder route to go about getting the silverware at the end of the season.
Yeah, that's a fair point. And Munster did go to Glasgow last year and won away in that quarter-final, which set them up on that run. And they're playing Glasgow at home this weekend. But we'll start with their performance against the Ospreys, Cian. Professional, I think that they said about 5 times at least in the aftermath, they kept referring to cup rugby or knockout rugby, that they took the approach that, you know, say Leinster didn't in the Champions Cup final, for example, but they're not alone in that. They took their points at every opportunity. Jack Crowley, I thought, was measured and professional in the way that he controlled the game, having had a pretty poor game, I thought, against Ulster the previous week. What did you make of the way Munster managed the energy of the game against the Ospreys? It wasn't exciting. It started off like a barn buster. It tailed off after that. But I thought, personally, being there covering it, fairly measured, fairly professional, job done, and the quarterfinals don't have to be memorable.
Exactly, yeah. And like, there's no extra points for getting a bonus point at this stage of the season. It's all about getting the job done. And you're right, the opening try that they scored through Simon Zebo, watching it back, 13 of the 15 Munster players touched the ball in that move. It was an incredible try. So it was a bit like the Ulster game in that, where they mixed some really good attack. Their maul was very good for that try that they scored through Niall Scannell, wasn't it? And the Ospreys are nuggety. We should give them some credit. Look, they snuck into the quarterfinals. They finished 8th, and they made life tough for Munster. And they went after them around the breakdown, pretty much similar again to what Ulster did. So from a Munster point of view, I don't know, maybe some supporters might be concerned that the last 3 performances maybe haven't been as good as, you know, other ones in what is a 10-game winning run. It's seriously impressive. 48 out of a possible 50 points, 8 bonus points. They've serious momentum behind them, and like all good champion teams, they've timed their run really, really well. I think they'll be disappointed, you know, like I mentioned about certain aspects of their ruck and how the Ospreys were able to slow down their ball, but I didn't have any issues at all with their approach. I think it was really, really sensible in what they did. They were probably an element of trying to conserve a bit of energy as well, because like we kind of all touched on there, it was going to take an unbelievable upset for the Ospreys to beat Munster at Thomond Park. They kept them scoreless for 75 minutes, which is incredible and shouldn't be glossed over either. Obviously, the Ospreys hit back just after Simon Zebo's try with a brilliant try of their own. And, you know, Munster, you know, will probably in a way welcome that, because that gives them something to work on, because Glasgow will certainly be able to exploit that kind of space in behind. But from there on in, to keep them scoreless for 75 minutes, look, regardless of the opposition, I know the Ospreys don't have the best attack in Europe, far from it, but it's a knockout game, and it's a massive feather in the cap, I think, for Dennis Leamy's defence, which I think has been really, really good this season. Yeah,
Luke, I mean, you've always got a great eye for defence, and you would have played with Dennis, who maybe has been the quieter partner in terms terms of like Mike Prendergast's attack has got serious reps over the last year or two for Munster since they've come in, and with good reason. They've played some great rugby, but to keep an opponent scoreless across 75 minutes, I think they have the best defensive record in the URC this season as well. What are they doing in that defence, and what do you like about it? And maybe if you see challenges, let us know about those as well.
Yeah, well, I quite like it, actually. I think it's a little bit less aggressive than Leinster's. I think what I do love is that I think no matter who's in the centre partnership, obviously I think Nankerville is a very important player for them going forward, but he's also an excellent defender. But I think O'Brien is a physical character in there, so he's fitted in nice. I always like Crowley. You hear me going on about this. I'm sure you're sick to your teeth, but I love a 10 that's game, like that's up for the fight, I love that about playing next to Sexton. Love that about Crowley, and I love that that partnership with himself, O'Brien and Frisch, was very difficult to break down on weekends, and I think like you've got a strong back row no matter who's in there for Munster. So straight away, if you have those things, I think you become very hard to break down, and I think Tyg Byrne is just an absolute nuisance at every single breakdown. He's just so fit, isn't he? I really admire him. He's a real nuisance for opposition teams. You could see throughout the game a few scuffles with Tupurik. They obviously tried to target him, that blue scrum cap. I'm sure there was someone wearing that in training all week, but he's so difficult to stop. So I think it's a combination of all those things. I think both the wingers are pretty decent defenders as well. So no matter who's in that kind of front four, or the last two usually in the end of kind of open play defensive sets, I always think the backs are all good there. And if the backs are good, generally they're giving in good information or they're in good positions, which helps out your forwards. So straight away, you're very hard to break down. You got Zebo, who's good in the air, although I think they did have, they weren't unbelievable in the air in the weekend, but they're just fairly solid all the way across the board, guys. And I think that's the key thing for me when I think about Munster and why they're so good. I think they look organised. They're a tight bunch, so they fight for each other. And as I said, I like all the backs. I think most teams will have some weakness somewhere, and I just don't see that with Munster defensively. So that's always a good thing to have. And a great place for someone like Leamy to start, who I really like. He's a guy you'd love to play for. I think that's important for a defensive coach. And you think of all the great ones down the years, they all have those kind of personalities, those nuggety personalities, and they're kind of smart guys generally as well. And he'd be a guy I'd like to play for. So I think there's a combination of loads of things, and that's a difficult thing to set your stall and say, well, look, it's this one thing. I think there's a lot of things that make them difficult to break down. And I think they'd be really difficult to beat coming into the end of the season, guys, particularly at home, So they're really in a good place. I was really pleased with them. I think, there was parts of the game that were tricky. I thought, I think Cian was right. I thought gamey is probably a good word for the Ospreys team. I think their two guys in the centre are very difficult, very physical guys to break down. But I thought the guys in the back row particularly, Jack Morgan was a nuisance all day, alongside, we know, Tupurik, but also Morris. Some great tackling throughout. And I thought Munster dealt with all those things pretty well. And it was a business-like performance. My one thing coming out of the game, and I'm going on for a while here, but I'll try and wrap it off quickly, is they did just a little, I did wonder about, did they look a little bit leggy, just a little bit at points in the game, or just a little bit tired? This group has played a lot of rugby over the last kind of, 10, 11, 12 weeks. And I just wonder, look, the key thing for them is that maybe they're at home. That might be the difference maker versus the other teams having to go, abroad and to places like South Africa for Leinster, So yeah, I don't know. That is my one concern with them. Otherwise, I just think they look really, really strong, and they'd be very difficult to beat.
Cian, we'll come back to the game against Glasgow in kind of, with a bit of predictions at the end. But like that sense that Luke has, if you watch their Edinburgh win, which was a great away win, but it was patchy at times, and Edinburgh, like all teams, had periods of dominance and put them in a bit of bother at times. The Ulster game was Harum Scarum. It was a bit crazy, and a lot of, like, that was a fairly inconsistent performance that they pulled it out of the bag with their bench. The weekend was probably their most controlled performance, I think, but without Nankerville, with Tom Ahern now gone for the season, I thought Joey Carberry's a big miss as well coming off the bench. That they have Barron back, Nankerville's back this weekend. Do you feel like they've lost momentum and that their attack has maybe run aground a little bit compared to what we saw maybe in South Africa, the Connacht game, and how easy do you think it'll be for them to get it back this weekend? Because I think in the next two games, if they have two games, they'll need to be able to break teams down.
Yeah, I think like Luke's right. I think there's probably an element of fatigue. Look, as there is for every team, it's important to say at this stage of the season. I mean, they went into camp, a lot of these players this time last year. It's been just a crazy, crazy long season. But then when you factor in the injury problems that Munster have obviously had all season, again, Luke is right. A lot of these guys have had to play extra minutes. Their depth isn't as strong as maybe it is, especially when you take away players like that. But I wouldn't be overly concerned. I thought the Ospreys performance was quite, like I think you used the word professional. Rod. I think they probably knew that, look, we should get through this. Let's conserve a bit of energy, take the points. And I think you would hope that they were doing that with what's to come down the line this weekend against Glasgow. In terms of their attack, yeah, look, like it has maybe stuttered a little bit, but I go back to that Simon Zebo try that they scored again last week. When they hit it, it is very, very difficult to stop. The transition from the Johan van Graan era into the Graham Rowntree era has been unbelievably successful, both in terms of them winning the URC, but also in terms of the exciting brand of rugby that they play. I don't think it's a coincidence that Munster have been far better in the second half of the season when the weather has improved. They've now become a fast-track team. They want the ball to be dry, whereas in the past, you would have associated Munster with, they'd like the rain to be coming down because the pack will be able to get on top. That's really changed, and it's been brilliant to watch. So I'd be very, not confident, certainly optimistic that they still have plenty of weapons to fire. I think Nankivell, you're dead right to mention him. It sounds like he's going to be back this weekend. Himself and Antoine Frisch. Look, it's such a pity that Frisch is leaving because they have developed a really, really good centre partnership, just as Tyg Byrne and RG Snyman have, and unfortunately that's going to be torn asunder at the end of the season as well. But they do have very good combinations. I think Casey and Crowley, they know each other like the back of their hand. Luke has touched on the two wingers, Shane Daly and Calvin Nash. They've both had excellent seasons as well. And obviously you have the old man Zebo at the back keeping everything together. And he's also keeping Mike Haley out of the team, who's been, along with Gavin Coombs, one of Munster's most consistent performers over the last couple of years. And while everyone's been talking about Zebo being back in the team, I think people are forgetting the guy he's keeping out of the team. It's been that speaks volumes for how well he's playing. So I still think they've got plenty of weapons to fire, and that's before we even talk about the attack. And they'll need to, because Glasgow and Munster have a real heated rivalry, and it's been great to watch that over the last couple of years. But they're going to fire plenty of shots in attack as well.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned Van Graan there. Like, it's about as happy a parting of the ways as possible, because I know he lost on Saturday, but like, he's done a great job at Bath. It's worked out well for everyone, really. Him moving on. Luke, Graham Rowntree said he was going to pour himself a glass of red wine and watch all the rugby on Saturday, and I guess he would have, maybe had a passing interest in what was going on with Leinster and Ulster. Leinster, I think we were all tuning in to see what kind of response we get from the Leinster frontliners. They were given, most of them, apart from Jamie Osborne, were given the weekend off for the Connacht game, and they came back in and performed very well. I think Ulster asked them a couple of very big questions in the first 20 minutes. They defended well on their line, a couple of big plays from Ryan and McCarthy, but over the course of the 80 they just overwhelmed Ulster. What did you make of their performance, and maybe what did you see as kind of progression from the Toulouse defeat?
You know what, I wouldn't have said progression, probably wouldn't have been the word that I think sprung to mind. I don't think I just think there's quite a difference in the opposition, you know. What I would say was, that game could have been a good bit different, like Ulster had some kind of gilt-edged opportunities in the first kind of 15-20 minutes. The Izuchuku one where he goes through, I think Caelan Doris misses a poor tackle on him, and he decides not to offload it. I don't know who's on his inside, whether it's Cooney or someone else, but I think they're going in for a try. I thought there was just a couple of big opportunities that Ulster missed. It could have been a little bit different. So, I mean, I don't know. I wasn't unbelievably convinced by them. I think we all know that they have a better squad, and I think probably a better team than Ulster as well. And I think that was probably the thing that stood out to me. I think, look, there's probably a difference where both projects are at this point in time. Leinster probably were finishing off a few of those. They probably finish off one of those two opportunities that Ulster missed at the start of the game, and that's probably just a tale of where the two teams are. I think there was parts of it that were good, though. I thought they looked pretty accurate. I thought their scrum looked strong, and that they'll need that in Loftus. I think that's going to be really important. That was very good against Toulouse as well, because I kind of am watching that. I mean, some of the jobs that the South African teams did 2 years ago to Leinster around that area, I think that looks like they've come on a little bit there, and they look like they're kind of a little bit more attack minded there or something. I don't know enough about the area, but I just know that they're getting a few penalties there, and they seem to be coming on top. They seem to be pushing teams around, particularly Healy actually and Alalato have been very good. They were excellent up in Ulster a couple of weeks ago as well, weren't they? So that's an area where Leinster will be strong, and they're going to need that, I think, next week, because we were all kind of thinking, we probably all had one eye on Loftus, didn't we? So that was positive. Still think the line out looks a little bit clunky to me as well. It's not for no reason that I'm going to the set pieces, because I think that'll be really important next week as well. I'd like to see them a bit more fluid. But yeah, look, I still am. I'm a little bit unconvinced by them, guys. That's probably where I am at the moment. I think this team is better than they're showing. I think they still look a little bit clunky from time to time. I think there's still a few odd decisions, like the Jamie Osborne. No, like they got away with it with that break where he doesn't pass to Gibson Park. But I just really hate that. I really, really hate that. I know it's like a small point because they scored the try anyway, but you got to give that pass. Against a better team, he gets taken down there, and all of a sudden that's a try gone missing. Yeah, I mean,
it was like Troy Parrott playing for Ireland in soccer last week. That's what I was thinking when I was watching him run through, because Troy Parrott obviously scores as well, but in my mind I'm going, surely you have to square the ball. But it's a good point. Sorry to interrupt you, Luke.
I expect them to get it together and to put in a huge performance next week. But I just feel like it's a huge ask to go down to Loftus, guys. You could see some of the Benetton players, breaks and play, like they're taking big gulps of oxygen. You know what I mean? It's such a difficult place to go and play. I can't explain to you how difficult it is and how different it is from playing at sea, like kind of normal sea level, up here. So it's a massive kind of thing to factor in. And it's been a long season, like they've had, I mean, the Heineken Cup final, the Investec Champions Cup final, would take a massive amount out of you, both mentally and physically. And I think, particularly that it went to extra time as well. So I don't know. I probably what I'm thinking is, I hope the worry is coming through my voice a little bit. I like that they could look good set piece wise. I'm not liking that I think they still give up a couple of opportunities defensively. I think there's still some kind of parts there that I really don't like, some personal technique moments, and just people going to sleep, from time to time as well. At different points, like Ulster did get through for a few scores that I thought, well, like that's just disappointing. There was nothing special that they kind of produced to break you down. And the reason I say that point is, I think there's a difference between both where Munster are defensively and where Leinster are defensively. If you think about the Ospreys try, like that was absolutely a moment of pure magic, wasn't it? Like that was we didn't even get to talk about the Ospreys try, but that was a moment of magic that broke down the Munster defense, and they weren't broken down by anything else. But Leinster are still getting broken down by things that I think they should be able to stop. And a really great team, and a team that will win a competition like this, probably doesn't give those scores away. So I still have some questions in that area about them. And that is a cause for concern against South African teams that have just some out-and-out finishers out in the back line. You make one mistake, one wrong move, one part of you're out of position for one moment, and it's over. It's game over. You're not catching those guys. So, I still have some concerns about them. I think they've taken the difficult road, and they've made it very, very difficult by some of the selection policies towards the end of the season. And I think they've got a big, big mountain to climb to get this win. They certainly have the personnel to do it. But I don't think they're all playing unbelievably well either. So yeah, loads to unpack there. I'll let Cian in there. Sorry for going on so long.
Off you go, Cian.
Where do I start? No, I actually find myself nodding along with agreement in a lot of what Luke's saying. I would be very reluctant to read too much into beating an Ulster team who are clearly in transition under Richie Murphy, who's done a brilliant job since he's come in. An Ulster team who were already missing their two first choice locks and three locks, and then Izuchuku goes off injured as well. So I mean, you're ripping the heart out of that Ulster team. And you could see it in Leinster's approach. I mean, Joe McCarthy looked like phenomenal. I thought Caelan Doris, for the large part, was excellent. Some of their carries and knocking the Ulster players back, they were venomous. But that's what we expect from this Leinster team, is to be like that in the URC. But the the issue I have is we didn't see that kind of stuff in when you step up the ranks against Toulouse in a Champions Cup final. So that's why I'd be holding fire as well. I still think the jury is out to a certain extent. I still think Leinster need to go and prove to themselves more than anyone that they haven't perhaps taken a step backwards. And the only way they're going to do that is go and win the whole UR seed, let alone winning in Loftus this weekend. They're going to have to back it up, hopefully from an Irish perspective in Thomond Park, as in hopefully Munster get through Glasgow. But I'd say they'd be...
Can I ask you a quick one? Sorry, it's difficult. Sorry, but what did you make of, like, I have found, I just thought Cian was a little quiet. I thought Baird had a poor game on the weekend. Any thoughts on that? Because I think Conan's playing now. Obviously, Conan's picked up some kind of knock, but if he's back, I mean, what did you make of Baird's performance on the weekend? I thought he had a lot of errors.
I think he has errors in his game, Luke, if I'm being honest. I don't think he has rounded out some of those maybe rough edges that he still has. Look, everyone knows what he's capable of in terms of the big game-breaking moments, even though, ironically, he needs to tidy them up as well, because he needs to learn how to make sure that he finishes them, whether that's not running away from the support lines. I think he's done some good things this season in terms of running the line out when James Ryan was gone as well. But in fairness, and I know Will is the same, we've been banging on about Jack Conan's form for most of the season, you'd have to say, and obviously he missed out last weekend. He is in South Africa with the squad at the moment, so do you think they might look at it, Rud?
Like, I've been doing a piece this week on, or it's going to run at some stage, on the numbers all Ireland's World Cup squad members have had since including the warm-up since they went into camp a year ago. Jack Conan's played very little rugby in the last calendar year compared to some of his rivals. Look, Baird, I think, they've clearly gone with that hybrid 4-6, and he did win 3 lineouts against the Head, and on a day where basically Leinster beat Ulster by destroying their set piece, particularly on their throw once Izuchuku went on. So he went off. So he did some elements of his game really well, but he is quite inconsistent. In terms of within games, and Dan Sheehan gave him an absolute roasting for not following up on that cross kick from Byrne. Yeah, I think he knows that. I think Dan Sheehan left him under no. I think he does. I think he admitted this himself. He maybe doesn't stay as present as he could in games.
He drifts in and out, doesn't he?
At times. And Jack Conan's talked about that himself. But look, like in terms of where Ulster went after Leinster, I thought it was very interesting and maybe a template for what the Bulls will do this weekend. Like John Cooney's kicking was exceptional, I thought, and Jacob Stockdale had one of his best games. I've seen him for a long time, but they clearly saw something in the Leinster back three. Richie Murphy, when I asked him about it afterwards, he talked about how, look, they're hiding Ross Byrne and Jemison Gibson Park there. They're not natural backfield players, and Jacob Stockdale's 6 foot whatever, and he's good in the air. Why not use him? But I'm pretty sure, Jimmy O'Brien got cleaned out a couple of times. Jordan Armour got cleaned out a couple of times.
Ross Byrne did.
Well, yeah, you kind of understand it a bit more. But like Luke, as a former back three player, are you worried at all, going to Loftus about the way Leinster struggled under that high ball? And is this where not to go over the Hugo Keenan debate all over again, but where the absence of Hugo Keenan for the rest of the season is going to come back to haunt Leinster and potentially Ireland?
Oh, completely. Yeah. I mean, I to be honest with you, my mind has been focused on URC, but yeah, I mean, definitely it'll impact you. I mean, you see, if you're a great catcher, if that's your real strength, South Africa's a great place to go and play your rugby. You see how Lee Byrne, like, I'm only referencing my own kind of career, I suppose, and my own memories and history, but I think, you look how Rob Kearney performed down there. He always played his best rugby against South Africa. It was my opinion of Rob, and I think that was because the kicking is so important down there, and it's such a big part of the game. And if you are strong in the air there, you can make a massive impact. And I thought that nearly made I thought that tour really made Rob Kearney's career.
Definitely,
I think Hugo Keenan has the potential to do that, and he has the added parts to his game where he's got that that unbelievable fitness level. And Rob had that too, but probably didn't have the same ability, that kind of passing ability and probably evasiveness maybe that Hugo Keenan has. So I think he's made for a South Africa tour. So we'll definitely miss him for Ireland. Look, I like Jimmy O'Brien, but I just think there's still probably a difference in that position at fullback in between himself and Keenan. I think, you'd have to give Jimmy O'Brien more time, of course, to see where he goes. But look, I think it was a good tactic by Richie. I really like when coaches kind of simplify things down like that and say, okay, well, let's simplify the game here. What position are we going to be in a lot? Well, generally speaking, from kickoffs, from them kicking to you, you're going to be tight to the touchline. Well, what's an obvious option to go from there if you have good, clean ruck ball? use your really good kicker in John Cooney and use your tall, quick winger against guys who are going to be, who teams are trying to hide back there. Like anywhere teams are trying to hide someone, you need to try and find them, I think. And I love that tactic by Richie Murphy. I think it's smart. And I think it's it's an easy thing for a team to understand. And they got great inroads there all game. So even Jordan Larmour's not a big guy as well. So I think it's a really good tactic. I think it worked really well for them. I think if the Bulls are watching or doing their doing their homework, which I'm sure they are, it's an easy place for them to go there as well. And I think under on the high veld as well, the ball goes a little bit higher, it's in the air a little bit longer, and they have kind of guys who are quicker than Stockdale, so they can get in amongst the Leinster guys there. So definitely a tactic that I think they'll employ. I think Leinster should employ it too, though. But I think on the receiving end, I just really never liked hiding players back in that position. I just don't like the idea of it. I'd be picking 15 guys on the pitch who are playing their position all night. Do you know, that kind of way?
Yeah.
And you don't have to worry about defensively. So it's an interesting one. I think Leinster will have to do some thinking about, whether they want to continue that tactic, because it was fairly obvious where Ulster had picked out a weakness, and I think they exposed it pretty well.
Cian, Ulster done now. I'll move on to the Ireland squad in a second, but have you seen enough in the last couple of weeks to think that even with all the departures, like Will Addison's been one of their best players recently, he's gone. Greg Jones comes on his last game for Ulster and does really well out of position at the weekend. They're losing a lot of players, but do you see the Richie Murphy plan, that there's a smart coach there who's going to get a lot out of these players, even if he might not have the cattle for it next year?
Well, his intelligence was summed up in that game, and you're right, they didn't quite have the cattle to take Leinster to the well, but his identification of weaknesses in Leinster and the ability to exploit it just shows how much of a good of a coach he is. And look, he had a tough job this stage of the season that he's come in, but I'd say Ulster fans will be, encouraged by what they've seen. It was a pity that obviously Izuchuku had to go off injured, but it was also a pity that they had to move him into the second row from the back row. He has been a revelation in the back row, and that's all it takes sometimes for some of these young guys, is a fresh pair of eyes in terms of a different coach, looking at things differently. And there's a guy who you could build your pack around for the next couple of years, along with Dave McCann, Harry Sheridan in the second row. They do have good players coming through, but you would be concerned around their depth. I'd be curious to see how their new out half, Aid Morgan, gets on when he comes in. Has struggled to make the breakthrough in Super Rugby, but he's obviously going to come in and replace Billy Burns. I'm still not convinced that Doak is a 10, even though he did create the try at the end of the game last weekend. But I think he's better suited to scrum half. But his issue is obviously that John Cooney has got a new lease of life since Richie Murphy has come in as well. So there are a few things I think for them to figure out over the summer. I'm not sure how much scope they have to bring in any more players. If you
Richie Murphy said the recruitment is
because they've obviously been cutting costs. They've been cutting the squad. They're losing their sponsorship of Ravenhill. So I think the future looks brighter than what it did, because around the time when Dan McFarlane left, you were kind of wondering about where Ulster go from here. And I think fair play for Richie Murphy for coming in and taking it on. It is going to be a tough job, and a lot of coaches might have thought, I'm not sure about that, but definitely brighter. The future looks brighter than it did a few months ago, but I think the depth could still be an issue next season for them.
So Ireland are naming their squad. We think Wednesday next week Andy Farrell will name the panel. We probably around 36 players to go to South Africa for 2 tests in Loftus, where Leinster are playing this weekend. Luke, who should start that first test at fullback, and why isn't it Simon Zebo?
It's not him, obviously, because he's retiring.
He's retiring at the end of the season, so he's available for selection. So I think he should bring Simon Zebo and start him.
There's no future in that for me. So I wouldn't be looking at that.
Rod is an old romantic. Old romantic.
I think that the test series the test series is the here and now. There's a test series to be won. He's available to play. He's the best fullback in Ireland right now. He's starting games. He's winning games. He's scoring tries. He's winning high balls. He's experienced. And I look across the other options, and without Hugo Keenan, I think he's the best bet. So, if it's not him, Luke, because I presume it's not going to be, because I think Andy Farrell probably thinks along the line as you guys. Are we looking at Jimmy O'Brien, or do you have another alternative that you're thinking?
Yeah, I like Jimmy O'Brien. I think he's the next best thing there. I like that he's kind of got a complete player. He's a nice tackler. He is generally pretty good in the air. He's got a nice kicking game, and he's a running threat himself. So yeah, no, it's Jimmy O'Brien for me. I agree on the Zebo thing. I just, for whatever reason, it doesn't seem to fit the eye in Irish camp. I think they probably haven't really come to terms with maybe the kind of different kind of personality he is. They're more relaxed, possibly around training. I'm not going to cover that all ground because I don't think there's any need to. I think he's not here to bash him at this stage. I think he's playing brilliantly. How highly I think of him as a player.
Yeah.
But I just think it's the other stuff that's always going to slow him down. I think people feel like those things they don't fit in the setup there. That kind of possible individuality or the more relaxed attitude to different parts of training. So and that's fine. I think that is fine. I can see that line of thinking. And that didn't fit with Zebo either. So that's fine too. Now, look, from an Irish perspective, I still think this is a great opportunity to grow your players, and I don't think you have to sacrifice winning, really going for the win and the here and now by picking someone like Jimmy O'Brien there. As a matter of fact, I think it's a sensible selection. I think it's the one that, you get an opportunity now to look behind, I suppose, the veil of that full back position and see what's there for the future. Because, Hugh O'Keenan, he's been injured this year, but it's been so rare that he has been injured. And I think that's been it was a real concern for us all, I think, at the World Cup, wasn't it? Like, as in, what happened if Keenan went down? We looked really kind of bare bones behind him. So I think it's an opportunity to develop that. I still think Jimmy O'Brien's a great player. I think he's close enough to Zebo. He's not that far away from him in terms of quality of player. And I think obviously his ceiling is higher, I think, because he's still younger and he's played less rugby. So, no, I'm happy with the Jimmy O'Brien selection. I think it's the right one, and I like him as a player. So, I hope he does get the opportunity. I think he's the guy that's the best fit for the role.
Cian, most of the Six Nations players are fit as it stands. I'm sure Andy Farrell will be touching wood and making sure he doesn't walk under any ladders in the next 2 weeks. Like Ian Henderson's gone for the season, and I would still have major doubts about Gary Ringrose, even though they say he's fit for this weekend. But
the weekly Gary Ringrose is back this weekend.
Yeah, look, I mean, you don't hear great things on the grapevine without ever being able to stand it up. I hope that the rumour mill is wrong, but that's obviously a concern. But he didn't play in the Six Nations anyway. Obviously, Keenan isn't around. How much scope is there for? Is this in any way a development tour? Like, do you see scope for a Cormac Izuchukwu, or do you see scope for anyone really coming on board that hasn't been capped for Ireland before? Is that for emerging Ireland down the line, or do you think that there's value in doing some development on this tour, taking a Sam Prendergast, a Cormac Izuchukwu for the experience alone?
Yeah, I think there's huge value in taking them. Whether they play is a different matter, but it's only a 2-test tour as well, so they're not like you're ripping them away for the bones of a month or whatever. So I think there'd be huge value in taking guys like that. I think it's really desperately unlucky that Tom Ahern is out injured, and it sounds like he's going to miss the tour as well, because I would actually put him almost in a different bracket. I think he would have fully earned his spot. He's different to Izuchukwu and Sam Prendergast. He was playing brilliantly and exactly the kind of player I think that Andy Farrell would have liked. So that's really disappointing from a Munster and Tom Ahern point of view. But I think, yeah, it'd be great to bring a couple of those like development players. Wasn't that kind of what they used to be called when they were in the Six Nations squad? But I would be very surprised if we saw much of a shift from what we saw in the Six Nations. Obviously today the Emerging Ireland Tour was named. Interesting to see, the reaction was probably pretty predictable in terms of most people that I saw, certainly online anyway, being up in arms in terms of, what's the point in this? But the IRFU would say, well, Jack Crowley, Joe McCarthy and Calvin Nash were three of the outstanding players that came through last year. So I think we'll see more of the development kind of guys go on that 3-game tour in South Africa in October, isn't it? But then you have a November series as well. And I think, while I could understand, the argument, if one of you put it to me, that why not, try a couple of guys in South Africa, it's not a World Cup, I totally get it. But I think November will provide opportunities well. Ireland are playing 4 games there, an extra game. There'd be no harm in, I think, blooding a few guys there as well, because at some stage, obviously, the shift is going to happen in terms of, the World Cup and the changeover from that. But I think this 2-test tour to South Africa, look, we've all heard the South Africa players that have come out in the media, whether it's been Etzebeth, Dielende coming out last week, stoking the fire. I'm sure Rassi Erasmus is in the background just cranking up the wheel, and it's fascinating to get that insight, isn't it, into their mindset.
Well, possibly the most interesting part of this week is the fact that the Springboks are doing a training camp in Pretoria. They trained at Loftus Versfeld today, which is beside where Leinster are staying, and they're both off tomorrow. And like Pretoria, Luke, you've been there. It's not a big place. There's only a certain amount of coffee shops you can go to. They're going to be rubbing shoulders with each other all day tomorrow, so they can find out exactly how many Irish players said we'll see in the final when they're talking to Etsabet. Luke, your perspective on it, like, is there any scope for development? Would you like to see any players brought along or even fast tracked now, like Jamie Osborne, for example? Or is this an elite tour for the kind of a core group of Irish players go win this series, and then there's a bit of a window then in the autumn to go and kind of add in a bit of development? Where's the balance, do you think?
Well, I think we've probably seen I would go 100% elite, but I'd probably make the argument that some of those guys look pretty elite to me. You know, I think they've proved it in fairly big games against really good players. You know, Osborne, I think, could definitely lay claim to that. I think Izuchukwu's played very well towards the end of the season now for less long period of time, but that's against a Leinster pack. That's an Irish pack. And like, let's not forget that Irish pack beat up the South African pack. They were the only team to beat them at the World Cup. So I'm not surprised that they're coming up with all sorts of lies and all sorts of garbage about it to try and build themselves up, because this is a huge fixture for them. Because, you know, if they lose twice to us, or if they lost twice to us over this little period, it'd be that'd hurt, you know, and it'd probably put a little bit of a stain on that World Cup. I think they'll still have the medals, but I think they'll always wonder about this Irish team, and are this Irish team actually better than them, you know? So sorry, to go back to your point, those two players are the standouts for me. I agree on Ahern. Really, really liked what he's done all season. I love the kind of that he has that expansive part to his game plan, to his game. So he looks very comfortable out in the wide channels. Obviously a big guy as well. So he would have gone, I think, very well in South Africa, would have suited the kind of harder grounds. Obviously the conditions probably won't be as good, but it's still harder grounds even in the winter there as well. So he would have suited a fast track. So it would have been good to see him. There's no one else that really stands out to my mind. I think it'll be interesting to see what he does on the wings. I think Stockdale, you're right, looked good towards the end of the season. Don't know how bad that knock he took was. Didn't look great, I didn't think, but yeah, I mean, I think he's playing well. I think he suits the ground down there as well. He's quick, he's big, he's good in the air. He's got a nice kicking game. And it'd be good to see him get back in there. But I think Larmour's been playing pretty good too. So few interesting calls for him to make, I suppose possibly what might be interesting is to see what he does at 10 as well. I don't know what other guy, what you guys think. That's a really interesting conversation for me. Because
in what sense do you think?
Well, I think my initial sense is that he's going to go with Frawley down there. But, they like Byrne. Byrne's producing a big occasion for them as well. But I suppose Frawley gives them more options. I think he probably will end up on the bench, particularly against South Africa, with how they treat their kind of bench composition between backs and forwards. So he's the obvious choice in terms of sitting on the bench because he covers more positions. So I'll be watching that one closely to see what the thinking is. Does he go with Frawley alone, or does he bring Byrne and Frawley? I don't know. That's a really interesting debate. What is very clear, though, is that Crowley has certainly taken a leap forward and is very much the incumbent and the man in possession there by quite a distance. And that doesn't look like it's going to be changing unless there's some kind of serious long-term injury. But I do think we do need to develop something behind Crowley. I don't think we want to end up in the same position where, in every big match on 65 minutes, if we're winning by 10 points, we have to, it's crazy not to bring off your out half. I think you need to be able to play the guy who's playing well in the game the whole way through. And we ended up for about 5 or 6 years having to pull Johnny Sexton off the pitch anytime it looked like we had some kind of lead, So I don't want us to be in that position or be in that position at a World Cup again. So yeah, I don't know. Anything standing out to you guys on that tour? Anyone you'd like to see in there aside from those two that I mentioned?
I don't think it's beyond the realms of possibility that Andy Farrell could bring Sam Prendergast. He's already been in a training squad in the Six Nations, and as we've seen since Andy Farrell has come in as head coach, he sees players differently to Leo Cullen and Stuart Lancaster when he was there at the time, Gibson Park being the prime example. So he might think that Sam Prendergast is the man that will be behind Jack Crowley, and he might look to fast track him, but it would be really throwing him into the deep end. But one player I think fully deserves a mention in the back three conversation is Shane Daly. He has been outstanding for Munster this season, and for me, I would have him ahead of Jacob Stockdale, I have to say, in an Ireland context. I was having a look at it. He has played every minute for Munster in the URC apart from 10 minutes when he was in the sin bin against Ulster earlier this season. His durability is absolutely incredible and shouldn't be kind of glossed over at all, and he reminds me a lot of a Calvin Nash, in terms of, some people might think, certain guys in the Irish system have a ceiling, but you look at how much Calvin Nash has kicked on since he's gone into Ireland camp, since he's had a new coach in terms of Mike Prendergast, and I get the sense that Shane Daly might have another level in him as well. I know he has been in around squads before in that, but I'd love to see him get another opportunity in green.
Funny, a lot of people down in Munster, former players, people who've seen him, think he'll be playing centre next season, that he played very well at centre as a schools player, and that now that Frisch is moving on, he could really do a role for them. He actually went on the last Emerging Ireland tour to South Africa, and whatever happened down there, or he just hasn't really got the look in since. Luke, this tour was announced today. Simon Easterby is going to take the squad. Everyone else other than Andy Farrell is involved in terms of the backroom staff. We obviously don't know what the squad looks like yet, but the games are, I think, better. They're playing the Pumas, they're playing Western Force, and they're playing the Cheetahs, all in Bloemfontein. It's a fairly in and out tour, but it will affect the provinces for 3 URC rounds. And we, I think, are seeing right now, or with the end of the season, how important the regular season is in terms of getting your placings. Andy Farrell thinks it's a kind of a launch pad for players to kind of play in October for this Emerging Ireland tour and get into the squad for November. Maybe bridges the gap for some of them. Someone like Sam Prendergast, if he's fit, he's definitely going. Players like James Culhane, lads who just can't get a look in. Where do you think it lies? Is it a good thing for Ireland to do this? Does it take away from the provinces? Is it what are your thoughts on it?
Do you know what? I'm kind of a little bit muddled on this one, guys. I can definitely see the benefits of it. In terms of giving guys opportunities who maybe don't often get a look in the provincial setups. And I like that you can kind of sometimes, maybe particularly in the forwards, you can kind of look at an athlete that maybe, just doesn't fit a coach's eye, but you say, do you know what, that guy actually has the body and the frame or the power or whatever to be an international forward. And for the backs, yeah, I mean, look, there's a bit of a jam up, isn't there, in Leinster at 10. So I think there's, that's an obvious place where you'd say, do you know what, I'd like to get, 3 games where I have a look at someone there. Prendergast is the obvious one. And yeah, so I definitely see some value in it. But again, I just don't really like the fact that we're kind of moving a little bit further away from, or just not moving further away, but I think we're probably devaluing the league a little bit. I always would say, well, I think, would you be better off putting a little bit of pressure on the interprovincial coaches to say, look, will you have a look at them in these games here? So I'm torn on this one, as you can tell. I can definitely see the value in it. We obviously can see the value ourselves and some of the guys who you mentioned earlier on who've come through off the back of the last tour. But I think my thinking at the time of that tour, or the last one, was that it was a bit of a mistake. I'd rather have seen them in the provincial jerseys, rather see them kind of take opportunities and stake a claim, because that's the best, to my mind, that's still the best springboard to get into the international team, is to be playing for your province. And I think that's probably where I lean on it, if I'm being completely honest. But I can see the value, particularly for guys who don't fit the eye and are not getting a look in.
Cian, speaking of springboards, this looks like a bit of a dry run for Simon Easterby to take over from Andy Farrell once he goes off with the Lions in 2025.
Yeah, and he obviously did it last year as well when Andy Farrell didn't go. So yeah, look, he would be the sort of obvious replacement. He's been part of the Ireland furniture for so long. Yeah, like incredible when you think about it. I think a lot of people would like to see maybe Paul O'Connell in that role, but it seems like there is, I don't know if hierarchy is the right word, but the fact that Easterby took it last year, I think, was a big indication. And look, we're talking about it, from a player's point of view, but Andrew Goodman's going to go on that tour. I know obviously the handover will happen in the summer from Mike Catt in terms of taking over as the backs coach there, but it's an opportunity, I suppose, for the coaches to get to grips with the job without the main man, Andy Farrell, as well. So but I'd be more on Luke's latter point there. I think it's a shame to take these players away from the provinces at what is a crucial time of the season. And look, I mentioned the three guys who kind of became the poster boys in terms of kicking on with Ireland: Calvin Nash, Jack Crowley and Joe McCarthy. But I don't know, can we say that what they did on the Emerging Ireland Tour is the reason they kicked on to where they are now? I mean, they were all super athletes anyway and have been playing regularly with their provinces. So I would be more on the second part of Luke's point there, that like we should be trying to encourage these guys to be playing for their provinces. But I know I can see it from the IRFU's point of view as well. It's going to benefit Team Ireland rather than the provinces.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're going to look ahead to the URC semi-finals now in a second, but just look back very quickly before we do our Bank of Ireland moments of the week, and I'll start with you, Cian. What stood out to you?
I went for James Lowe's second try. An unbelievable piece of skill, a brilliant kick from Ross Byrne as well, who I thought had a decent game, again in the kind of game that you would expect him to play well with the pack on the front foot. But lovely little switch from Jimmy O'Brien back to Ross Byrne, crossfield kick. And what I really liked about it was how he let the ball roll across his body. I think a lot of players could have snatched at that and tried to kick it through. Now, I didn't think Stuart Moore covered himself in a lot of glory there, I have to say. I think he probably should have almost taken one for the team and just taken James Lowe out. But once he let the ball roll across, I thought it was just an unbelievable touch. Wouldn't looked out of place on a soccer pitch, five-a-side pitch.
It was quite a weekend for that, with Sam Prendergast and also Shane Daly also improvising pretty well in their moments as well.
Yeah, and I was going to give Sam Prendergast an honourable mention, and Shane Daly, because they were both exquisite moments as well. But I went for Lowe because it ended up in the try, and he also had to control it for a second time with his foot. So the absolute definition, I think, of the arch poacher, James Lowe. He is just, the numbers that he's racking up are incredible. So that was my Bank of Ireland moment of the week.
Isn't it? It is amazing, guys. The amount of back three players, their defence is just absolutely appalling. Like he doesn't even need to take Lowe out there. Just ease him slightly out with the left shoulder and try and run with him. By other players on the pitch. Sometime I honestly, the kick defence has been atrocious by some of the players the last couple of weeks. I just don't know if no one's focusing on it or whatever. Sorry, that's the real negative tint on it.
He had a couple of tough moments in that game. Stuart Moore did.
It was. They actually put him up for media afterwards, which I thought was a difficult enough one to go through for Stuart Moore, because I'm sure he was reliving some of those moments. Let's go back to your good moment, Luke. Your highlights rather than your lowlights.
Such a miserable man. Yes.
Well, you do have a broken ankle, in fairness. We need to get some painkillers into you, and we'll get the good moments.
They're obviously just coming in now. Yeah, I'm obviously just feeling the impact. But look, my moment of the week is probably a bit more of a heart warmer, to be honest with you. Moving slightly on from my previous miserable comments, it's Ross Maloney going over for that try at the end of the game. Didn't really mean much in the kind of context of the game, but he's kind of one of the unsung heroes that are so important to all your setups. Really positive guy, has had some really nice moments the last couple of years. Has played some lovely rugby, and he moves on, I think, to pastures new, to a good, really good setup, and hopefully has a big impact over there. But it was really nice to see him get over the line for a try. You could see how pleased he was. His last home match really for Leinster. So that was a nice moment, I thought, and he's a guy I'm very fond of. So that was good to see, and always good to see the unsung heroes get a bit of limelight. So that was my moment of the week. Yeah,
it looks like he's making a move to a pretty a club that's on the up. And Bath came very close to winning the Premiership, and I know Van Graan got a lot of pelters when he was here, but he's doing a good job there.
And he got a 3-year deal. Well, he was up for media a couple of weeks ago. He got a 3-year deal, and you'd have to, obviously one of the top English clubs. That speaks volumes for how highly he is rated. I know he's highly rated within Leinster. It's such a pity he never got to win that first cap, but a nice moment for sure, because he's been a stalwart for Leinster for years.
I'm going to go with Friday night in Thomond Park for my moment of the week, and Simon Zebo's try. I know I've gone on about him probably a bit too much in this podcast, but it was a really good try. But you mentioned the build up yourself and the finish. He took on Keelan Giles, one of the fastest players in the URC, and burned him on the outside, used his power to get across the line, and it was just, you want to be down at Thomond Park. I know you're going down this weekend, Cian, to hear the love for Zebo. They're really going to miss him as an organisation. He just gets bums on seats, people excited, people just love watching him play and calling his name, and he's going to have a big role to play in these semi-finals. And we're going to finish off by looking ahead to those semi-finals. Leinster up first. Loftus, Luke, you've played there in probably the greatest game that I was ever lucky enough to be at. I know Leinster against the Bulls is not quite the same calibre as the second test, effectively decider between the Lions and the Springboks, but it's still going to be pretty hot and heavy. How much, do you think the travel will take out of them? I was just on the call with them earlier on. They're talking a good game. They've all gone via Dubai. They got in on Monday. They trained lightly today. They've got tomorrow off, and then a big session on Thursday. Like, where do you think they're at in terms of going after this challenge against a Bulls team that are missing 3 of their 4 World Cup winners, but they're a strong, well organised outfit under Jake White?
They'd be really, really difficult. And you could see Jake White had a bit of a rallying call, I think, to their supporters as well. So I think he's hoping for a big turnout and to make sure Loftus is as loud as possible. Look, I expect this to be an unbelievably tight game. I'd love to know if Conan's on the bench and if Ringrose is back in the picture. But it might be a difficult one to bring him back in, particularly at Loftus on the high veldt. Might be tough on the lungs for a guy who's very fit. So love to know those 2 things, but we don't know at this juncture. With the information I have, I think I'm still going to go with Leinster. I think they'll get the job done. I hope they train wisely. That's going to be an important thing, that they feel a little bit of burn in the lungs, but they don't go too far with that. The tendency, I think, is to probably think that, well, because we've had all that travel, that we won't that we won't train hard at the start of the week, and we'll have a big session in the middle. I don't think they need it. I made this argument the last couple of weeks. This time of the year, it's all about organization. Should be light sessions, should be just skills, focusing on the skills, focusing on your technique around tackle and ruck, and getting your set piece right. So I hope they do that. I hope they don't panic and try and overwork them down there. I'm expecting them to come out on top in a close one, get the job done. They've got enough ability and they've got enough quality to do it, but God, I'm really not confident. And I was worried earlier on when I was talking about it. That was obvious for anyone who was listening, I think.
Like before you got to Loftus for that test, Luke, you would have been at altitude a couple of times. I remember the games in Rustenburg and Johannesburg. But what's it actually like I know, like Leinster, it's a different experience for Leinster because there's arriving and playing a couple of days later. But try to give us our listeners maybe a perspective on what it's like to play at altitude.
Yeah, so it's kind of difficult. So for example, we would have had our first training session was in Joburg when we arrived, and I remember we did a half lap. This is the end of the season. We just played a Heineken Cup final against Leicester. Played a lot of hard matches. Had won a Grand Slam that year, so we were super fit. And I remember thinking, whoa, this is it's just a burning in the lungs, So it's something after a half lap you'd barely be feeling that when you're that fit. You know what I mean? At sea level. So yeah, and then when you combine it, so rugby fitness is kind of very different to just even running. So that's just running. But when you combine that with wrestling with guys and then running to the next thing, pushing and shoving in a scrum, pushing and shoving in a maul, those things were really, really draining. You hear of, say, for example, MMA fighters, I think, are probably some of the fittest guys in the world, and girls. And they always say the wrestling is the thing that kills you. So rugby players have to do a combination of wrestling and running, and it's really, really difficult to do that at altitude when you're already struggling for oxygen. You just feel like you can't get enough in, and you just get that burn, and it doesn't go away. So it's really, really difficult to cope with. It's very difficult to also judge your kicking as well, particularly for guys kicking a goal. Now, once you get the hang of it and you get a few kicks in, it actually can be a lovely place to kick because you don't have to try and hit the ball too hard. You can focus on technique and just being kind of, have nice rhythm through a kick. You see the South African guys are really, really good at that. So yeah, there's lots to deal with. But I think this team is very fit. I would love if they'd brought them down for that first game on the tour a couple of weeks ago. I think they would have felt a little bit there and they'd be a little bit calmer after kind of 10 or 15 minutes of the game when it really hits you and you can start to panic. But they didn't do that. So I hope they don't regret that. That's my one thing kind of thinking back on the last couple of weeks. And I thought that might be a mistake. So we wait and see if it is. Hopefully they've timed it perfectly.
Cian, they have to win this, don't they?
I made this point earlier. They have to win this and they have to win the following week as well. The idea of this Leinster team with the squad they have, with the coaches they have, going 3 seasons without a trophy is unthinkable. They've never won the URC since South Africa's big sides come in. To me, that's a monkey that they need to get off their backs as well. There's no better way, I suppose, of doing it to silence the critics or prove people wrong is by winning in Loftus. Now, I do think we should mention the couple of key players that the Bulls are without, like Curtly Arons is just a massive loss. In my mind, one of the best wingers in the world, and they're also missing Kane and Moody. So they're two big losses. I was at the RDS game a few weeks ago. Feels like ages ago now, actually, at this stage. And they were gamey for a long time, but Leinster then rolled on their bench and they pulled away. So that will stand for something as well. But this is, like if Leinster were to lose this, allowing for all the travel and like all the difficulties involved in that, like that didn't stop Munster from getting the job done last year with what you'd have to say, a lot of people say, a lesser squad. So there's huge pressure on Leinster this weekend, and there's huge pressure on them then if they do beat the Bulls to back it up again, and that's going to be tricky coming back from South Africa as well, because they're going to have obviously less training time in that. So but like I said, I think sympathy will be in short supply, because Munster had to go and do it the hard way last year, and they showed that it can be done, and there's no doubt that this Leinster team can do it.
There's pressure on Munster as well, isn't there, Cian? I mean, you're going down to Thomond at the weekend, like they're 80 minutes away from a home final at Thomond Park, doing what the team did in 2011. I spoke to Tracey a couple of weeks ago. He was there as a fan. He remembers that he wants to replicate it. They want Leinster, I think, in that final as well. They probably won't say it too loudly. But Glasgow have, as you said earlier, a proper rival, a real tradition in this game, and they've just beaten the Stormers. Probably took a bit out of them, and I know Manny Libbok had a pretty poor game, but I was actually at Leinster or Munster Glasgow earlier in the year. It was a really weird game, really high scoring on that pitch down in Cork. But the Glasgow scored 5 tries off their maul, weirdly enough. This is tricky, I think, for Munster. It's not a gimme by any means. It's
absolutely not. I don't think anyone, certainly in Munster, would be thinking that way either. I think you'd have to say Munster and Glasgow, apart from the Irish provinces, is probably the best rivalry in the URC at the moment. There is such needle there, and utter dislike, you'd have to say, between the two teams, which is great. Like, that's what we want to see. As much as it's probably PC to say, oh, we don't want to see that in the game, we absolutely do. So this is a very tough game. Glasgow's attack has been brilliant. Obviously Nigel Carolyn has been running that. He's done a great job since he's gone over there from Connacht and the Ireland under-20s. He'll have a good insight into a lot of these players. But Munster, I know Thomond Park might not be the fortress of old. They've slipped up a couple of times over the last few years, but it's still bloody tough to lose there. I think there'll be a much bigger crowd than they had last weekend. Munster Glasgow is a lot sexier of a game, I think, than the Munster Ospreys. The Friday night was a killer as well. So a lot of things are in Munster's favour, and you're right, there is pressure on them just as there is Leinster, because by them winning the URC ahead of time last year, the expectations, not just externally from the likes of us talking on a podcast, internally as well, have shifted as well. And if Munster were to go and defend their URC title at Thomond Park, that would be absolutely incredible. I know you were over at the final, one of the only ones to actually go to the final last year, and it was a pity. Obviously, like, some diehard supporters did make the journey, but
2,500,
which is phenomenal. But you think of what it would be like if they could do that in Thomond Park, because Munster supporters have been so brilliant over the years, following them through thick and thin. But it would be an amazing occasion if they were able to do it. But I don't think anyone will be taking Glasgow for granted this week. It's more than a banana skin. It's going to be a really, really tough game, but I would expect Munster to get the job done.
Luke, are we getting a Leinster or a Munster-Leinster final at Thomond Park?
So I'd be nervous about Glasgow as well. I thought some of their back three look very, very dangerous, aren't they? They've got serious pace out there, and they got a nuggety enough pack as well with a pretty good back row. So I think they'll be highly competitive there. And I wonder how they got a slight edge possibly in the front row is my only area, I think, where they might have a little bit of an edge, even though I think the Munster front row guys are going well. I like Jaeger on the bench too. That's nice to be able to bring him off there. And they did give up a couple of opportunities. They were fairly stingy defensively against the Stormers, but there was a couple of opportunities where they slipped up. So I think Munster should have enough. I think they're attacking well enough, and they're good in the 22. Like, Munster are hard once they get in there. They usually come away with points, and they're very difficult to get the ball off in there. And particularly at home, I think they'll play with that kind of manic energy of trying to get to that final. So expect them to get it done. But they'll have to contain a few characters. The two centres for Glasgow, very, very strong, very, very dangerous. Tuipulotu, you saw how dangerous he was and the try he set up. I don't know. I'm going Munster. I'm sticking Munster. I think they'll get the job done. But I think it'll be a tight one as well. I think they're two great semi-finals. I'm really pleased with the teams we've got. And I think both teams that are going to both the away venues can turn over both the home teams. So that's exactly what you want. I think there's genuine opportunities for both teams to win the game. But I'm going with an All-Ireland final, I think.
What about you, Rud? We always ask Will for his expert opinion. No pressure.
I think Glasgow are really dangerous for Munster, and I don't think it's a gimme. But law of average, I think the two Irish teams are strong enough to prevail. But I think there might be a few bumps along the way, and Munster need to get that attack just rolling again. Nankerville's a big player back, and Leinster just needs to knuckle down, and they're in for a bit of a wild ride over in Pretoria. And as Luke alluded to, they haven't had this experience, these players. It's probably no harm for Andy Farrell maybe he would have preferred it us, and they had a couple of weeks to prepare like Razzie Erasmus is doing right now. But yeah, I think probably an All-Irish final, and it'd be a great way to sign off the domestic season for one thing. And so we've a lot to look forward to this weekend. We'll be back next week to look back on it all, and our congratulations go to himself and Alice on their nuptials. My invitation got lost in the post. I think yours did as well, Cian, did it? In the meantime, you can subscribe to The Left Wing on Apple and Spotify. You can also tune in on the Irish Independent website. And my thanks to Cian and Luke for joining me. We'll catch you all soon.